box. So I hope we will have a good session today. Melvin, I cannot screen share. There, okay. Okay. So can you be in charge of the slides?
Sure.
Okay. So by the way, after the Luzon Regional Conference of UGAT next week or starting tomorrow will be the Mindanao Regional Conference hosted by the Ateneo de Davao. And after that, the Visayas Regional Conference hosted by the University of San Carlos. So we hope it's a very different UGAT conference this year, and we hope you will be able to attend all of it or as much as you can. And actually, you can potentially through the recordings. Okay, so the next slide shows the place for the evaluation to be sent. And I think this will also appear in the chat box. And the next slide shows, well, we hope you will be interested to join UGAT. We are an organization of anthropologists and anthropology practitioners. So it's not necessary to have a certificate or of having a degree in anthropology, as long as you are practicing it, meaning to say, looking into the same questions, having the same curiosity, then we welcome you to our community. And next, if you would need a certificate for having attended this particular session, please take note of the page to visit. This is our website. And next, the next slide. It's very small, but I would like to plug that the Pang-Aghamtao journal, the official journal of the UGAT, is calling for papers. We hope to have a special issue on the Philippine Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or IPRA, 2 decades later. So if you're interested to submit an article, the minimum length is 2,000 words. And the deadline is February. You can find out more by going to the UGAT pages in Facebook perhaps, and in the website. Okay, next. I think we have some ceremonies to accomplish briefly.
Koy ko kami gimu to langit
bayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, telas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong bangaw, ay hinatang tulad, awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iingin, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidinig. Lumalang araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
So that was the opening prayer and anthem. And I think we have one to be heard. Melvin, Nancy is asking for the how to get in. Introduce the participants for today's forum. we are we are waiting. I don't know if he's already arrived. Our speakers are Ponciano L. Benagen. He's the founding president of UGAT and a former chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of the Philippines. And Diliman is also a commissioner of the Constitutional that drafted the very much grateful for. I think he's in the learning systems in the Philippines. Include the next one is, although we might change the order, Benjamin Abadjano. Welcome. He is a trustee of the ACC, the Development Foundation. He also established the Pamulaan in Davao City, the Indigenous peoples, student IP representatives. A third is University, and he is a former president of UGAT. Next, we have Ruth S. Batani, who is currently she's a cultural anthropologist with a PhD also from the University of the Philippines. And she is currently the Vice President for Research and Extension of Benguet State University. Next, we have Nancy Ann P. Gonzalez. She is the Vice President for Academic Affairs of the Ifugao State University. She has written on indigenizing the curriculum, and her PhD is in education. So these are our speakers. Before this started, we discussed about the format, which will be to go topic by topic instead of 5 minutes for each person. We will go through 3 topics and discuss each of them one by one, allowing everybody to participate before moving on to the next topic. The first topic will be on the definition and importance, the definition of IP education and the importance of integrating IP education in higher education, and also MO has created this requirement. The second topic we shall call cover will have to do with the experiences of different universities, such as the ones we have with us, in uh, integrating IP education. The third topic will be the challenges and ways of moving forward. And throughout all of this, I think one of the key issues would be the idea of authenticity in IP education. After the discussion, we shall have Q&A, and that will be it. So I don't know who are present, but we shall begin with on the topic of the definition of IP education and its importance. So I shall call on him first.
Sino? Is it going to be Benjamin or me?
No, it's Euphrasia Abaya. It's
okay.
you. Sorry,
Alright.
am I choppy?
Yeah, choppy ka kasi eh. Anyhow,
Oh dear. Anyhow, the first topic is the definition of IP education, and we're asking Euphrasia Abaya to be the first to present.
All right. I've shared my screen here. Let me just say good morning to everyone. And I think this is going to be a very exciting discussion because the whole concept from the very start, in my view, is a bit problematic, the concept of IP studies / education. But the CMO, if you recall, can you see my slides? Yung nag-share ako ng slides. Can you now see?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Here.
Yeah. Because in the CMO, I was trying to find kung meron silang categorical definition. Obviously, wala. So what I did was to revisit the three RAs that prompted CHED to issue this memorandum order. And there I found topics such as poverty, human rights abuse, integration of Filipino Muslim and Indigenous people's history, culture and identity in Philippine history, and then the affirmation of IP rights down the line. So I thought that by putting all this together, the topical areas identified in the CMO might constitute initially my conceptualization of what is IP studies / education, right? Okay. So, but at the same time, I know that in the Philippine context, when you talk about IP education, you are referring specifically to education exclusively intended for indigenous peoples in the Philippines, which is why DepEd in 2011 or sometime 2010, meron silang linabas talaga na program nila, yung iPad, no? So there you go. So that's my point, no? Pero elsewhere, may category indigenous studies. I think ito yung mamaya malalaman natin to through Mr. Bajano, no? Kasi kanilang school is really IP education, IP studies. And if I may add, another university in the Philippines, in the nation, no, is Lyceum University of the Philippines. Meron din silang indigenous studies. Okay? So, ang category is indigenous studies. So now, let me share with you some definitions of what is indigenous studies. So it is a cross-discipline that circulates an ever-expanding corpus of knowledge. It collects and redistributes knowledge about indigenous peoples. And sabi din dito sa Center for Indigenous Studies in University of Toronto, Indigenous Studies is an interdisciplinary program dedicated to the scholarly study of research of the priorities and aspirations of Indigenous peoples, to provide an opportunity for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to learn and think about Indigenous knowledge in creative, transformative, and critical ways. It endangers a rigorous and respectful understanding of Indigenous people's languages, knowledge, cultures, histories, politics, art, intellectual traditions, and research methodologies. In other words, yung programs doon involve not only IPs, but also non-IPs. The students, no, mix sila. So that makes it rather different from what's going on in the Philippines. So shall I proceed, Maria? The importance of integrating? Or shall we listen to Ben first? His concept of Indigenous education.
I think it's better you just proceed with your presentation.
Sir Fras, you're on mute.
Sorry. So one of the questions is about the importance of integrating IP studies in higher education institution. So I thought at the very start, I said, the importance is, beyond increased awareness on the part of learners as regards IP ways of being, knowing, and acting within their sociocultural ecological world, integration should be able to pave the way for self and social transformation. I'm referring to the learners. No? So there must be a change in ways of thinking, change in policy, unsettle what we think we know about IPs, practice ethically engaged studies, and resist idealizing, fetishizing, and instrumentalizing IP culture in the name of integration in formal curriculum. Because that's a tendency, Pag yung integrating involves kasi a process of mediation. Hence, we should be mindful of who does the integrating, which itself involves selection of particular subject matter and for what purpose, for example, or for whose benefit. So integration enacted solely by education experts might not be a culturally appropriate move. So alternatively, I think what should be realized are situations in which the IPs themselves are involved in making certain decisions as to what will be the content, pedagogy, and assessment schemes of IP education. There. So maybe now we can listen to Ben.
Good morning, everyone. Can I request my technical assistant to come in to present our PowerPoint presentation, to give you our sharing on the value of Indigenous education and how it can be integrated in the higher education program. By the way, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see now the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so before I'll proceed with the details of my presentation, allow me first to give you a context of how we started our program now, and on Indigenous education, particularly for the Indigenous peoples, and eventually how it has also expanded even to non-Indigenous people's sector. Now, in my encounter with the Indigenous peoples for the past 32 years, these are the things that, or these are the words that they told us now why they want Indigenous education to really be implemented in their communities. Because they think that many of the Indigenous knowledge systems and practices are not being integrated in the mainstream education program. And therefore, they have lost the sense of who they are. And this statement clearly illustrates the indigenous dream of a culturally responsive and relevant higher education program. It is a dream that speaks about the indigenous peoples have realized the value and importance of indigenous higher education in their lives. It is a dream that shows up IP's awareness on how important culturally inclusive education is for social, cultural, and economic development and for building a common future. More and more, they also see the great need to make higher education more relevant and responsive to the challenges of the present and future generation. To produce graduates equipped with new skills, knowledge, and ideals that are grounded on the values of their own social and cultural contexts and realities. Indeed, the indigenous people's dream speaks about longing to have a part, a share, and contribution in the pursuit of unity and development of, um, of their communities and the country as a whole. Because I think they feel that their own knowledge is not being recognized by the mainstream society that can also help create a more sustainable and resilient country. Therefore, indigenous education is first of all a recognition and a response to the indigenous people's rights to quality, relevant, responsive, and meaningful education in the context of their identities, realities, and promotes their inherent values, wisdom, lifeways, and systems and practices. The recent initiative of SHED on the integration of indigenous people's studies into the curricula is indeed a welcome development. In several gatherings with educators and in all levels, both in government and non-government, researchers and development workers, there is always a growing demand for local and traditional knowledge and information to be integrated in the learning processes, whether in the fields of science, health, and medicine, environment, climate change adaptation, and disaster preparedness and management, leadership and governance, livelihood and enterprises, and many more. It is also very inspiring to note that we live in an era wherein more people and institutions are realizing the wealth of knowledge and information available from the indigenous peoples that can help in creating a more sustainable development for the nation and the world. And most especially this recent pandemic that we are experiencing now, we are again reminded that there is a need for us to go back and to see how the indigenous knowledge systems and practices can help us better prepared on this new normal that we are talking about. Because if you look at the realities that we are facing now, it goes back to issues on environment and how we are on the values that are already that have lost that we have lost our own indigenous values as a people. So in 2000, as a response to all these realities that we are facing, a group of organizations, institutions decided to band together and to form this program called Pamulaan Center for Indigenous Peoples Education. Its mission is to create culturally appropriate and relevant pathways of educational training formation, research and development for IP youth, leaders, teachers, facilitators, and development workers. Right now, we are offering 5 courses: Bachelor of Science in Social Entrepreneurship, Bachelor of Science in Education, Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness, Bachelor of Science in Development Anthropology, and Bachelor of Science in Peace Education. Pamulaan provides a variety of school and community-based academic and non-academic formation, addressing the critical needs of various indigenous communities of the country. Now, on the development of curriculum and instruction, Pamulaan went through a year-long consultation and research in partnership with indigenous knowledge bearers, leaders, university professors, and development agents. And then from time to time, these stakeholders also review and evaluate the learnings and effectivity in implementing the education programs. In fact, at the beginning, we had the sessions were combined with indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples. And later on, we discovered a lot of difficulties in that, no, in terms of really understanding the whole learning processes. Now, as a response to all the challenges that we are facing in implementing IP education program in the higher level, we decided to strengthen the ethnographic and research program, which is also being implemented by the indigenous youth together with the professors, so that they will have better appreciation and understanding on the life of the indigenous peoples, and therefore the integration will be much easier. And at the same time, we also implemented extension programs and services to various indigenous communities that serves as laboratories for the courses that we are offering. Therefore, the integration of indigenous knowledge is not limited in the four walls of the classrooms. They are being tested in the areas, in the community itself, in the indigenous peoples. Communities, and how the integration is really responding to the needs of the learners. Now, because of our learning for the past 20 years, we thought of organizing a consortium. It's called Niche. This is a consortium of more than 21 like-minded institutions, private and state universities and colleges in the Philippines. And we have decided to band together in the advocacy of promoting responsive and relevant higher education program for and with the indigenous peoples. The group is called NICH, which stands for National Coalition on Higher Education for Indigenous Peoples. Such a union brought about the creation of a loose but dedicated coalition of educators, school officials, and researchers, whose main objective was to create a platform for ongoing dialogue, learning exchange, and joint advocacy, mainly for developing a culture-sensitive education program relevant for both IPs and non-IPs in the Philippines. And this is being done through the four pillars of higher education in pedagogy, research, community extension, and policies. So basically, that's our experience in integrating indigenous education in the higher level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abadjano. I think should we stop and discuss this topic, or shall we go on to our other speakers? Maybe I'll call the other speakers that are here. There's Ruth Batani, and after her, I don't know if Nancy Gonzalez was admitted was able to get in. So perhaps we can ask Ruth, or well, if we go back to our agenda, we're supposed to look at the definition. If there's any, I'll just summarize yes, who's speaking? Hello. Okay, so I'll just take note of, there's so many initiatives that have been taking place from the presentation of Mr. Abadjano just now. I think maybe we can hear, maybe it would be better to just hear from the other speakers first. So could I call on Ruth? Are you there? Yes, Ruth.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to
Can you share your experiences? Yes, Ruth.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you share your experiences and your if you have anything to add to the definition of IP education and the on something to add on your thoughts on integrating it with higher education.
yes, Ma'am Maria, can you see
Yes,
my screen?
I see your face right now.
Ma'am, ma'am, the host should enable me so I can share screen.
Um, Jesse or Melvin?
Yes, I already made you, ma'am, a co-host so you can share.
But that's a different account by make Ruth core card the one she's using.
Yes, I already did.
A host na yun. Pwede
That.
na ma'am.
Uh,
Nakikita na ba?
yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ma'am Maria, Sir Melvin, colleagues and our mentors in anthropology. I have titled this talk, Engaging Local Knowledge on Healing and Medicinal Plants in a High School Science Project. I would be benefiting from the conceptual framing provided by Sir Fras, and of course the success stories provided us by Sir Benjamin. Yun pala yung benefit no, ng later speakers. So let me just point out, or let me just have some keywords here. What counts as knowledge? We know very well that Western education has marginalized our indigenous knowledge systems, with science being highlighted as the true knowledge, if not the only knowledge, and our IKS or indigenous knowledge systems as merely beliefs and superstitions. Today, we are witnessing a recognition of both knowledges as at par, but there is still a continuing marginalization of this kind of knowledges. In this talk, let me also include the natural environment, including the lands and resources, which would define the health and well-being context. Let me now go to the project, the original project, which I am drawing this paper. So initially, or from the very start, the project is both a research and development project. So it has involved the documentation um, of herbal plants, of medicinal plants, which should be inputted into the digital library. And the development aspect or the extension aspect has also involved capacity building on participatory research, mainly with community members and later on with the high school, the Kadaklan National High School. Particularly for this paper, I shall be talking about our raw experiences and reflections on the project. And I would also try to explore how marginalized knowledge can be mainstream through science project in particular high school. Let me also say that the PCHRD, which funded our project, the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, which funded this project, required us to undertake ethical clearance because this is a health project. So we need to have the ethical clearance, including the free prior informed consent. I should also be noting here that the seeking of ethical clearance and free prior informed consent, the fact that I'm also from the community, has eaten so much time and effort, but has also taught us, particularly the team, how to be accountable as well as ethical. Like the question of what benefits would the community get from the project ultimately defined our ethics for this particular engagement. We will talk about the Ika-Chakran. Ika-Chakran would not be listed as one of the major or the ethno-linguistic groups in the Cordillera. This has actually been missed out in earlier Western ethnographic classification, because if you remember, for the Cordillera, the Western educators had listed only eight ethno-linguistic groups, missing out so many of the minor ethno-linguistic groups, including the Ika-Chakran. Also, Kadaklan has been listed by IUCN as a biodiversity hotspot. Let me also say that the community has just recently, in the last 2 years, completed its road concreting, which would be shaping in terms of how the community would be looked at today. So we see here a changing picture. For example, since the project is on health and healing practices, a changing picture on morbidity, because this time you have injuries and accidents already being listed involving motorcycle accidents because of road concreting, which is very ironic. On the other hand, there's still a continuing healing tradition with focus on the Monpukush or the herbalist. And then we still have the Mangilot or the Hilot. And then, of course, a cluster of medicinal plants, the fact that they still maintain forest and mountain resources. So we have here a map of Kadaklan, Eastern Mountain Province. By the way, Kadaklan in history, in local history, would be listed as one community in Mountain Province that was never colonized, only after the post-war period and by the Belgian priests. They have, of course, stories of resistances, but it has not been documented very well, unlike its Western Mountain Province counterpart. Ang dami na pong nasulat sa kanila compared sa Eastern Mountain Province. Okay, as far as the yes, earlier I have noted that the project has its own work plan, how to go about implementing the project, but through the participatory framing of the project, we had to give up some of the activities in the work plan and had to agree and negotiate, navigate with the community members of how to go about the project. Let me read this one. This conversation, therefore, traces transformation from an academe-centered project that initially was confined to merely identifying and rediscovery of plant resources for digitalization for preservation, quote unquote, to a project that engages the public. It outlines how young people's participation with older members of the community have eventually defined the character of the project, and how during the project phase, the actual rediscovery of the diversity of the resources, the project also served as staging ground for practical pursuits. Together with the young members of the project team, the senior and junior high school students have reworked the involvement in the project with value addition towards making it a science project, like, the assessment of biodiversity involved some knowledge on taxonomy, but at the same time, the ethno part of it, the stories behind the medicinal plants. So again, if we go back to the project, we can see indeed, no, a documentation. We started documenting with the elders, but eventually we realized, and it was articulated, it was expressed by the high school teachers that we need to involve the LGU, including Kagawad, who are also tourist guides, in resource-rich areas or communities like Kadaklan. Nagkaroon na po no, ng byword ng how to guide the tourists. So, nagkaroon na rin ng tourist guide training. And then, of course, the involvement, the active involvement of the high school students and the teachers. Also, in our activities, we have made use of what resources the locals have. So as far as the high school students are concerned, we made use of mobile phones to take a photo of the plants, the weeds, actually, pukush, which is a local term, actually refers to weeds, no? Which forms part of the whole healing tradition. So making use of mobile phones during biodiversity walk, including inventory of herbal plants. And then, of course, we also involve them in the biodiversity assessment, look into the floral sources. This is very interesting because a member of the team, a consultant of the project team, who is a bryophyte expert, listed 17 bryophytes, moss and ferns, which are one of the remaining species, floral species that are endangered. And then, of course, finally, we have produced the ethnobotany booklet as part of the knowledge product. So from all these activities, we can see that the connection between the tangible, the material culture, with the intangible culture. So here I have put up here an illustration about the pukus, or the herbs, the medicinal plants, and then together with the community members, the high school students, we have to listen to the stories related to the herbs or the plants, including the tales and its practical use as far as health and well-being is concerned. I also realized that by engaging the high school students in the whole process, we were not only doing knowledge transmission, we were actually doing knowledge acquisition as well as knowledge circulation. Of course, that would involve the project team, no? As a whole. Kung titignan po kasi natin, no, parang we always problematize how to transmit knowledge. But also we realize we should also problematize when we speak of IP education, how knowledge can be acquired. In the present day context, for example, the use of mobile phones is also creating and shaping young people's behavior. Like it creates a culture of isolation, a culture of individualism. But by engaging these kinds of opportunities, it creates spaces for conversation, spaces for discussions. So overall, yung ilang reflection points naman po namin dito, no? We were able to capture and undertake a non-linear process that would mean the participatory processes, the ethnographer being involved, become spaces for interaction and sharing, but also bringing out knowledge creation using the natural environment, and the high school students reworking, no? Making it or reworking the project as their own science project, science discovery project. Sa ngayon nga, parang yung taxonomic knowledge nila plus yung stories behind these herbs ay isasama daw nila sa contest, no, doon sa provincial science fair. We have also noted here the reworking of processes such as the FPIC. Initially kasi medyo nagkaroon kami ng negative experience with NCIP, the office processing the FPIC. But eventually, in the process, we also realized FPIC is naman talaga necessary because there is really, yung sabi nga ni Sir Pras kanina, fetishization, cultural looting, romanticization. The FPIC somehow made us more responsible and accountable for our own actions. The issuance of certification precondition, for example, which is attached to FPIC, made us come up with a MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, that would identify our roles and responsibilities as a member of the research team, including yung co-sharing din of responsibilities with the community members. Of course, marami pa ring issues dyan. However, for this particular project, I can say we were able naman to rework to make it more favorable and doable for us. And then, of course, since taga doon din naman ako sa community, I was able to mobilize my kinship, my kin, which was necessary for us to establish rapport, but at the same time, make me more accountable to the outcomes of the project. So with that note, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So this was a very concrete experience of your university. But may I ask, this is for a university project or was it for the high school students?
This is a yes, ma'am. This is a PCHRD funded project, course through the university, and
Yes.
from its conceptualization, it was supposed to not only do research but also to capacitate the community members in terms of documenting their own IKS in relation to health and healing. Yes, ma'am, which also reminded me, very strong kasi yung support din ng PCHRD doon sa what can the community benefit from the whole project. So nakatulong din to facilitate the processing of things. I can also say so much of the activity was devoted for the extension activities. Parang ako na nga parang siningit-singit na lang yung research. But basically, we also had to document the whole experience, the whole processes.
Okay. So we have heard from two different institutions, the Pamulaan and I think this Benguet State University. I was thinking, what if we hear first from another speaker who represents the Ifugao State University, so we can, because the kinds of experiences they are sharing are quite different. So one is more on research and the other is more on like coordinating to produce IT curriculum. Maybe let's just get the whole range first and hear a presentation from Nancy Gonzalez before we try to identify certain issues that are appearing. I'm also looking at some of the messages, or I spotted one. So after that, maybe we can go more into the discussion, but I would like to, I think, hear from all the participants first. So, hello. Nancy was able to get into the Zoom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. Mhm.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, good morning, Maria, and good morning to all our participants. Allow me to share how Ifugao State University was able to integrate indigenous knowledge in the curriculum. So our project is not only in the curriculum, but also on the research aspect. So I titled, I'm not going to share any screen. I'll discuss it spontaneously. So the title of my discussion is Integrating Indigenous Knowledge in Higher Education, Ifugao State University Success Story. Just to briefly say something about our university, it started in 1920 and became it has 6 campuses, and it just had, how do you call this one, celebrated its 100 years of academic service. Now, for our IK activities, first, in 2009, we had a project with Japan and FUJ Japan, and the title is Nurturing Indigenous Knowledge Education for the Young Generation. So in this project, we have been having activities together with the indigenous knowledge holders, and with the fund given to us by the Japan, we were able to come up with the Indigenous Knowledge Workbook. This workbook contains 10 chapters that is more on the different IK of Ifugao. So with this, we made use of this output, this IK workbook, as our main instrument in the pilot testing. So we had a subject, Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices subject in the BEE and BSE program, yeah, including Bachelor in Political Science. So we integrated it in the curriculum, and after which we did a research. We tried to determine as to whether is there an effect, a difference when we integrate IKSP in the curriculum or not. And it came out that according to the students, before the IKSP was introduced to our students, it was revealed that they had low knowledge in terms of IKSP, but after they took IKSP as a subject, there was an increased knowledge on the level of IKSP for our students. Because of that, in 2017, when the Commission on Higher Education released the CMOs on the revision, when all of us, whether private or government higher institutions, we were required to revise our curriculum based on the CMOs. So with that, we have integrated already IKSP as a subject in all the programs that were revised. All the programs, so with CMOs, we have included IKSP as a subject. One of the subjects was that of the IKSP, which we use the book that I was saying. And for some other subjects, they indigenize the curriculum by adding, like, for example, one of this is indigenous agriculture, indigenous laws and systems and the like. So in short, we already have integrated IK in our curricula since 2017. But this was like fully implemented when our first years already came in 2019. So 2019. Yeah, in 2019, our students already have taken IK as one of the institutional courses that we had. So that is one. Now, another project was being done by our former president, Serafin El Ngohayon, whereby the book that we had crafted in 2009. He is just doing the revision together with other of the faculty members. And we just had our discussions yesterday before the book the revised book will come out. So aside from that, integrating the curriculum, we also have here one project, the Satoyama project. This is again a project of IFSU together with Japan. And we had been doing a lot of activities, research activities, and some research activities on indigenous knowledge. Another activity that we are having is our program with the City Pills. Our City Pills is a program which is being funded by City Pills, meaning Center for Taiwan, Philippines, Indigenous and Local Knowledge and Sustainable Studies project. And this is being funded by Taiwan. So what are the projects that we had together with City Pills? We had been training the DepEd faculty members on IK. So we were able to come up with the production of IKSP learning modules. The faculty of, we have identified faculty members from DepEd. They came in and we are very happy because we were able to produce the learning modules that they need for in teaching IK in DepEd. And we have in fact identified one DepEd high school as our pilot school for this program. That's the Gohang National High School. And recently, last February, we had just launched the development also of contextualized learning modules, still being funded by City Pills of Taiwan. And it's ongoing. So together with the City Pill, with the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, we are also proposing to have a training of our IFSU instructors and professors who are teaching the IKSP subjects and the other subjects that were identified related to IK. And this will be launched next month because it's still in the process, and we are going to come up with IKSP learning modules, which is different from the one which I was telling you, the first one which we had on the Nurturing Indigenous Knowledge Education workbook. So that's it. But still, for IFSU, what are some of the IK projects that we are doing being funded by our government here? We are proposing short courses or programs on IK, and this will be done in one of our campuses after its approval. So this will be a focus for IFSU Hapao campus. So far, those are our success stories in terms of the integration of IK in the curricula. So we integrated already IK in our curricula before CHED released its order that we're going to integrate IK in our curriculum. So far, that is how the Ifugao State University has successfully integrated indigenous knowledge in its curricula. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe we would like to hear what are the challenges for IFSU in terms of your experience is the longest maybe here in terms of integration. What are the biggest issues perhaps, and have you ever evaluated the IT education integration?
Am I going to answer, or you're going to have a series of questions after?
Actually, okay, it can wait. Actually, it can wait. Maybe I would like to ask if is Pons present? Melvin, are all the speakers here? Because earlier I wasn't. Is Pons Benagen present. So,
So far, ma'am, wala po sa
no.
cellphone.
Okay. I'm having a little technical problem because my touch screen, kasi it's an iPad, is is and then I don't know how strong the signal is, but I think it's strong enough. But anyway, I can't seem to control my touch screen. I can't get out of one of the boxes. So I'm not able to see the chat box where I think there are questions that have been posed. So anyway, I hope the organizers can find a way to send them to me. I've been trying. Maybe if they can send them to me by email, I can see them because there's also no signal in this lounge for the cell phone. But if Pons is not there, I'll just highlight some of the questions that I've noted down for myself, and we can plunge into the discussion. So I think from the I think we were able naman to cover the different topics we're supposed to look at sabay-sabay. So I think one of the questions that was raised in the beginning is whether IP education is it intended for IPs or is it intended for non-IPs? And would that matter in terms of integration? That's one question that struck me. Another question has something to do with continuities with the DepEd definition of IP education and how it has been implementing it with how maybe higher educational institutions are launching different kinds of programs. So for example, in Ruth's case, they are talking to, well, so for example, it can be through different kinds of extension initiatives that the higher educational institutions are arriving at IP education and integrating it into their curriculum and extension activities. And in the case of Pamulaan, I think it's very interesting that there's a broad consortium trying to discuss and figure out how to address the issues for IP education. And I think the IFSU experience is all on its own. I don't know if it's part of the niche that has been identified by Professor Abadjano. So let me see. Maybe the other question is that has been raised by Ruth is who are the IPs, because it can be more complex than just what is previously identified. There are many kinds, there are many different people who might say, I am an IP and our group is not recognized and it has these different kinds of knowledge. And so that's another one. And the other one is the intergenerational knowledge gaps between the young generation and older generations, and how addressing all of this through research. Okay, I don't know if I have done justice to all the issues, but one of the questions that was raised at the beginning was, how do we know or assess that this is an authentic IP, that the authentic IP knowledge and integration into the higher educational programs. Maybe we can just check if Pons is around. So if he's not around, then I would ask any of the participants if anyone would like to address the first question, whether you think of IP education in terms of if it's for IPs and non-IPs, or for non-IPs, or a mix. How does that change the way it should be designed? Maybe we could ask.
Marina?
Yes?
Yeah. I think the issue of
Yeah.
that you're asking, whether it should be exclusively for IPs or it should be for IPs and non-IPs. My sense is that the way Indigenous studies is formulated elsewhere, I mean, these are advanced countries like Canada, and USA. Very strong kasi yung ano nila doon advocacy. And so it doesn't matter. I mean, it is a program, a degree program, interdisciplinary program, and there's jobs for people who would graduate in the program. Like, I think part of it is yung kailangan lang talaga awareness raising fundamentally, and then how that knowledge can be translated in practice in terms of social relational issues and even policy making. Ganun yung idea. So itong sa CHED, perhaps ganun ang direction nila. Hindi talaga exclusively for IPs lang na ginagawa ng DepEd. That's how DepEd has formulated it. That's why they call it IP education. Kaya there's a confusion because CHED is also using the same category, IP education. So kailangan talaga ma-clarify yan. The case that was presented in Ifugao, I think maganda yon because nakita nila na there's really courses na designed na IP studies. Hindi lang nila ini-incorporate, kundi talagang these are subjects and courses. And that's another danger, no? Doon sa sinasabi ng CHED. Ano ibig sabihin ng incorporate? Parang malabo din yon. Ano yung i-incorporate mo? How would you choose? How would you particularize? That's why, I think part of the issue has something to do with politics of inclusion and exclusion of knowledge. Kailangan natin talagang pag-usapan yun. But my sense is that at the very start, klaro naman yung sa CHED, may pagka-radical sila. Kailangan may IP rights, kailangan ma-address yung marginalization, kailangan ma-address yung history, culture, and identity ng mga IPs because hindi sila recognized, things like that, no? And so it is still in its nascent stage, I think, itong ginagawa ng CHED. So marami pang room to really improve it and perhaps start interrogating it first. Ano yung mga weaknesses nila? So yun ang point ko, which is why one of the issues that you're raising in this webinar is the whole notion of authenticity, which I think is also problematic. What is authentic IP studies situation? For me, it's a very, it invites a lot of confusion because I feel authenticity is an essentialist concept, okay? That can deny the dynamism of IP studies because IP studies is predicated as in local history, in culture, local, social organization, social structures, and environment. So kailangan nating i-rethink yan, no? Wala naman talagang, kasi in flux lahat. Because if you define authenticity, you expect certain attributes, but those attributes are, fluid yung mga yon, which is why I think it's more productive to think of IP studies as flexible, responsive to teaching and learning, which generate ideas and practices promoting a vision of society grounded in the principles of human rights, social justice, and equity. This precisely resonates with the CHED memorandum. Kasi klaro doon, yung kanilang starting point, human rights, social justice, equity, mga ganong politically laden or ideologically laden categories. Now, next item pala to, no? Kasi sa kaalaman ng lahat, in preparing this webinar, we were given topics to tackle. So that's how I prepared for this webinar. And one of the topics is this. What resources and preparations are needed? Diba? So if I may proceed, ito yung mga naiisip ko. So we need agentic human resource. Hindi yung mga ano lang, follow the leader. Masyadong leader-centered. Kailangan yung mga nandyan, talagang hindi di kahon. And then we need, and I think this was mentioned by Sir Benji already, culturally and socially responsive curriculum. We need appropriate learning materials, and we also need valid assessment tools. Of course, we also need sustainable infrastructure and facilities. And this is very important. We have to, I think this is of course my personal bias, we have to adopt critical pedagogy. No? Kasi yung iba, they're just reproducing the system. They're not challenging the system. And then we need a governance structure, no, na talagang suitable for the needs and aspirations of IPs and by extension, Indigenous studies, no, as a whole. And then we need climate change and disaster risk reduction and management. They have to be factored into this. So all of which I think provide the condition for active involvement of well-meaning representatives from Indigenous communities in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of IP studies in diverse contexts. So that's how I look at that issue of needs and preparations. Baka si Sir Benji meron din, no? Kasi nasa sulat yun sa binigay sa atin. Sir Benji might have some thoughts. So I end there.
I think I would like to add what Professor Abaya said. I think the value of the, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, the value of the CHED memorandum, I think it's not just for Indigenous peoples,
Yes.
but also for non-Indigenous peoples, because I think it's now, I think the right time that we who are not identified as Indigenous peoples, how we could learn from the Indigenous knowledge. Because in reality, all of us were Indigenous in the past. Okay? All of us are Indigenous. But the thing is, we lost our sense of who we are because of colonialization. And now I think this CHED order is giving us the opportunity to go back to the Indigenous knowledge that we still have, and especially the Indigenous peoples themselves, who can remind us of this knowledge that we can use of in developing the country, not just of the Indigenous communities, but the country as a whole. Because there are many issues now. If you look at the different issues in society, it would really encourage us to go back to the Indigenous wisdom on how to take care of the environment. Now, I mentioned this already about the pandemic. There's so many things that we could learn from the Indigenous ways of healing and in the relationship with the environment and nature that we have lost. That's why we are experiencing all these kinds of problems now in society. And then the issue also of authenticity, I think that's a very, because it's a very difficult question to answer, because each one have their own way of definition of authenticity. And I think it's also the same thing about, I don't know if you've remembered about this, I think a few years ago, there was this survey regarding ethnicity. It also created a lot of problems, no? And so I think it requires more discussion about that topic on authenticity. And another important aspect also is how I think the CHED's memorandum is also inviting us how to listen not just to the professors, the professional professors, but also the Indigenous knowledge bearers who can teach us so many things about life, about different aspects of the environment and other things. No? So there's so much opportunities. Kaya nga nakita ko itong CHED memorandum is creating a lot of opportunities for the academic environment, because it's actually inviting us to go beyond than what we are learning from from books, from other people, but go back to the knowledge that we already have that are not being recognized, no? And yun siguro. Ang swerte nung sa Mountain Province because most of them are IPs already. I think that's an advantage of people from the universities in the Mountain Province. But for most of the universities in Luzon and Mindanao, parang hindi pa ganun kadami yung universities na mas marami yung IPs. And therefore, there is that opportunity, no, for us to relearn and rediscover the knowledge that we have.
Okay, may I read some of the comments before? I see Refresh Abaya raising his hand. I'll just read a chat message from that was forwarded here. Sorry, wait, where is it? Wala. Okay, so it has relation to what has been talked about just now. From Dr. Zialcita, he says, thank you, Fras, for problematizing integration into the nation-based curriculum of the DepEd. While a narrative to connect all of us in the archipelago is needed, it's also important to listen to the particular narratives of the various IP groups. Such narratives will help to broaden and nuance the current nation-based narrative of the DepEd. So we have to look at this, that there's more than one way of looking at things. There is another related comment to Dr. Abaya. I agree with Dr. Abaya because if we consider authenticity, from whose point of view? If to assess authenticity, we based our views from the mainstream view, then we're doing bias to IPs. So, okay, there are more comments, but maybe we'll go back first to the discussion. Fras, you were raising your hand.
Yeah, I think we should of course, there's on the one hand, no, there's this recognition na very rich ang knowledge, ang daming mga practical application, ang dami natin mga issues in the country like climate change and so forth, and we regard the indigenous peoples as the steward of the environment and all these practices, no, that contribute to, you know, environmental protection and then contribute to the perpetuation of biodiversity and so forth and so on. But on the other hand, I think we should remind ourselves about the social, economic, political condition, no, of the IPs. I mean, we know that they are victims of development aggression and militarization and so forth and so on. No? So kailangan nating balansihin. Ang knowledge na yon ay may context to them. The people, the knowledge bearers are facing a great deal of problems in their lives, no? So ang daming problema. And I think we should revisit our political economy formulations. No? Kailangan siguro ganyan. Dapat ilagay natin yung knowledge from a political economic perspective and revisit issues of power. Kasi knowledge, power-laden din naman yan eh, di ba? Sinong gumagamit? We know that ang daming mga gumagamit sa IP knowledge, di ba? Piracy and so forth and so on. So in our curriculum, no, mga subjects on IP studies, kailangan ma-factor in yung mga yan. To veer away from the tendency to romanticize. Sino nga sinasabi ko kanina eh? To fetishize knowledge. Importante na i-rethink natin yan. Okay, Maria, I'm done.
Yes. Maybe in relation to the list that you showed about requirements, resources in order to integrate IP education, maybe the others might also like to comment on that. Maybe like Ruth or Nancy or Mr. Benji, would they, or anyway, can we hear from Ruth and Nancy if they would like to add to the so far anything? Okay, let's see. Okay, well, then I will read again the okay, there's another comment here from Jerry Areta. I agree that we should revert back to the indigenous knowledge or knowledges. There was earlier, I think we also need to, Bruce was highlighting that it's not so simple because indigenous knowledge is something that can change, and Euphrasia was also saying it could be more history and the dynamics of the indigenous that needs to be highlighted. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that. I guess it would make a very big difference if you go to college in the Cordillera or in some universities in Mindanao. Because of this CHED memorandum order, the whole experience might change as opposed to going to college, higher educational institutions in urban centers or in Metro Manila. What do you think?
I agree, Maria. I think,
Yes.
sabi nga ni Sir Benji, it's an opportunity, no? CHED has opened up the space, no? But of course, the challenge now is how do we create those subjects? How do we craft a program? So kailangan ng very clear philosophy of education. Mga ganyan, no? And so we can also derive that philosophy of education from the indigenous peoples themselves. Kasi meron din silang indigenous learning systems, di ba? And Sir Pons Binagan has written about this. So marami tayo talagang makukuha. So the direction of indigenous studies in the Philippines would be really qualitatively different from the ones formulated abroad. Kasi historicized dapat lahat eh. Kailangan grounded sa history, grounded sa everyday life experiences, grounded sa attention to relationships of power, broader structure, macro structures, and so forth and so on. So, ang call talaga dito, sino ang gagawa? And so, may I continue my slide share, Maria?
If nobody has any objection, okay.
Hindi, baka si Ruth meron, Maria, Gracia, meron ka bang ideas dyan? It's your turn. I mean, you know, before
Ruth or Nancy?
Nancy,
Yeah, just to share
Ruth
actually,
wants to
CHED, with CHED giving us the opportunity to integrate IK in the curriculum, I sincerely appreciate that, but integrating IK in the curriculum would really take years, just like with our experience at Fugao State University, the crafting, I mean, what are the contents of the IK systems that we're going to share to our students? When we did this one, we had been inviting indigenous knowledge holders to come to our university, or if not, if because of like example schedules, you cannot just ask them to come to our school. We are the ones going to them, and it takes time. So it's about 2 to 3 years before we were able to come up with the book that we used in the curriculum. And before integrating it in the curriculum, like what I said a while back, we still have to pilot test it as to whether is this really needed by our students, and true enough, they really need it, because they themselves, our students themselves, admitted that modernization, globalization also have affected them not to have to really given much attention in preserving our own culture. So for me, I really appreciate CHED for doing this, and just with what I said a while back, we already have integrated IK in our curriculum before CHED did the action. But that's really recognizing also our IPs. And I'd like to remark on what you made mentioned a while back, that is it really for the IPs only? Definitely, it's not only for the IPs. And because we come to understand people, how come they are behaving like this or like that? How come this is their culture? It is through the integration of IK in the curriculum that we are better able to understand others also. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, that's very nice. It's like we gain an anthropological perspective in the process. I think Ruth also was wanting to comment.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, would like to follow through Sir Kabaya's discussions.
Ruth, I cannot hear you.
Oh, I see. Uh, hello, can you hear me now? Hello? What about
Hmm,
me?
medyo mahina yung volume.
Sige, ma'am. I will relocate. Hello, can you hear me now?
Hello? Better?
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to follow through the discussion by Sir Pras. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Um, the issues with IP education would also lead us back to how we have been handling education previously. So we all note that issues on integration would bring out concerns about how do we integrate ba? Is it already integration whenever we speak of you know, looking at ethnomathematics, no? Well, that can be one. On the other hand, if we go back to the project I was talking about, we were also confronted with concerns about just focusing on taxonomic classification, on taxonomy, which is very science-based. And eventually we realized that there is really a need to take a look at stories behind particular plants that has healed particular diseases that occurred in the community. No? So in that way, there's integration of the local knowledge, but not really getting rid of the values related to this particular knowledge or particular tangible culture. Again, integration might end up, the knowledge, the local knowledges, assimilated into the system. Parang yung sinasabi ni Sir Pons din earlier na we can mainstream our local knowledges without being assimilated. So parang yung integrity pa rin of the local knowledge has been reworked and reformulated, pero nandun pa rin yung integrity. As far as the university is concerned, one of the major challenges is that yes, we are allowed to, in fact, we're being encouraged to have courses or subjects that would address issues on IP education. However, yung main challenge din kasi dyan ay kahit na ang university namin ay 90% indigenous siya, hindi rin naman kasi necessarily na i-assume natin na ang mga faculty members are already adept with how to handle or how to facilitate indigenous related courseworks. Well, unang-una sa lahat, sila din naman ay naging biktima ng Western education. In the process of being educated, you also lose the indigenous knowledge systems. On the other hand, doon sa province-based na schools, halimbawa doon sa Kadaklan National High School, ngayon pa lang kasi nagkakaroon ng road concreting, which for them, that's an opportunity for change. But on the other hand, it also threatens yung mountain and forest resources, because in the past, road concreting has always been interpreted as getting the gold and copper resources in the Cordillera, no? So both bad and good, no, yung nakikita natin with road concreting. Kaya nga din nakita din nila, na-realize din ng community na there is really a need for us to document and then have it be published, na syempre ang knowledge holders pa rin ay sila. Of course, ano din, no, another challenge would be personally in our team, for example, it was a multidisciplinary team. I am the project leader. I had to deal with study leaders who are very passionate din, no, doon sa kanilang specialization. But then they're also very much aggressive in terms of doing the publication. Kasi nga, unlike the social sciences na mahirap mag-publish, sa kanila, parang isang plant lang nag-characterize lang sila, halimbawa ng isang tanim, pwede na siyang i-publish, no? So I had to mediate kasi nga prepared ba ang community in relation to this kind of publications. Tayo yung authors o kayo yung authors, and then somebody else would read it. Oh, may potential na pang drug discovery yan. How we prepare the communities, no, in dealing with this kind of complexities later, no? So ano naman, no, again, we had to agree among ourselves na if ever we publish, we still have to get the community's consent. At the same time, explain to them ano yung possible consequences and are we prepared for that. Initially, we have agreed na yung halimbawa, yung knowledge products namin, knowledge products ng high school students will have to be registered with the Intellectual Property Rights Office of the AU, not in our names, but in their names as a collective knowledge, collective owners of that knowledge, if only to protect. Doon kasi sa infra law, wala talagang community registration or community protection of this kind of knowledges. So we're already looking at and exploring other means of protecting this kind of knowledges. Parang wala din kaming choice kasi nga wala naman sa IPRA yung community registration of collective knowledge, but to register it muna dito sa...
Hello? Okay. Hello?
Okay.
Yes. Are you finished? Hello? Yes. Kasi nawala yung audio. Okay.
Okay. Yes, yes ma'am. I'd like also to follow through yung point ni Mr. kanina na alongside with curriculum development and then of course issues on integration, there is really a continuing threat in relation to yung halimbawa doon sa aming project site, biodiversity, sustainability of biodiversity resources. No? Like with road concreting, we also realize there is a long-term plan for the area to build hydropower dams. And we all know from experience that hydroelectric power dams, ang kasama parating yan ay mining, exploration, and all. So that's one big threat that we're also trying to discuss with the communities. No? However, parang ano din for the longest time kasi ang community din na ito ay hindi naman talaga nagkaroon ng very negative experience. Unlike in other communities na meron talagang militarization, development aggression, and other, IP rights violations, no, which is very concrete in many areas in the world or even in the country. So the Cordillera is not exempted from that.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So Euphrasia is raising his hand, but I will just share a comment we have also received. Well, there's thanks. Thank you, Doc, from, I can't read the email. Thank you to Dr. Fras for sharing a nuanced takeaway, critical discourse. And there's a question here. As pointed out by Ruth Batani, an important point on the teacher's readiness to handle IP studies education. The question is, how did Pangmulaan or IFSU manage to capacitate their teachers, faculty to handle IP studies/education? So I think it's addressed to Pangmulaan and IFSU. Dr. Yes.
Okay, do you hear me? Do I have to answer that now?
You can. Maybe it would be good now, and then we'll go to refresh after.
Okay.
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 And
Yes, that's really a big challenge for us because from the very start, we recognized that many of the faculty of the university were not that prepared. That's why we even recommended that before we can start the implementing education or integrating education, an IP education program in the university, there has to be a series of lectures on awareness building from among the faculty themselves. And part of that is also appreciation of indigenous knowledge, because that's very important. Now, before we can also prepare the teachers, there is also that series of lectures and workshops that we had to organize for the teachers to have deeper appreciation and understanding on indigenous knowledge itself. And second is an ongoing training of the different aspects of indigenous education, not just about indigenous knowledge, but also how indigenous education had to be implemented in the different subject areas of the university. Because these teachers have been teaching for many years already. And integrating indigenous studies in the curriculum is for them was very, very challenging. That's why we had to provide also that opportunity for people to learn from one another. So it's a learning between the faculty members and also indigenous knowledge bearers, as well as the IP advocates, and who may not be teaching professionally, but also can provide reflections and insights on how to handle indigenous knowledge and in dealing also with indigenous peoples.
thank you. From IFSU perspective, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Nancy.
Maria. Yeah, when we first implemented this, that our teachers are going to teach the subjects indigenous knowledge, we are thinking we come from the IP, so we should know. That was our thought. But actually, when we were already implementing, there were some faculty members who were telling, it seems I have inadequacy on this IPSP as a subject. So how could I teach? So with this, we did coaching and mentoring, so that some of our faculty members were able to at least deliver the lesson better than what is expected. So because of that, we this time we already have proposed a training for our faculty members who will be teaching. And like what I said, we are with the City Pills project with Taiwan, we have funded the training and coming up of instructional materials, scholarly works for our faculty members to use. So that's it. We have training and development of more IK materials. And in the development, we will always acknowledge and we will always have to connect with our indigenous knowledge holders. And if possible, our source of knowledge should be the ones that were also certified or identified by NCIP. So that's how we are going through the implementation of our IKSP program in the curriculum.
So the FPIC process has been highlighted by Ruth, and I can imagine that there will be more issues in the future because generally Indigenous knowledge is not actually a written down kind of knowledge, but what's might be the transformation through the integration process is that it becomes something that is encoded in books, whereas it might still actually be alive and able to change also. So that might become a future issue in as an outcome of the attempts to integrate. There might be like a freezing of the knowledge. That's just my little input there. By the way, that previous question came from Jesse Vargas.
Yeah.
There is another.
Maria,
Yes.
I would just
Yes.
like to add because this time our NCIP is already active in terms of our activities with regards to IK. No, recently, even with our researches, NCIP province, our province and the region had already made sure that even in the conduct of researches for IK, they have to take, this permits the, how do you call this one again? Yeah, we need the permit from NCIP, and sometimes it's the bottling neck. I say this
Yes.
because it takes a long time.
Yes.
In fact, one of our researchers during the pandemic, when she tried to acquire the NCIP, is this a permit? Yeah, permit. It took a
FPIC.
long time, so we have to write the FPIC. We have to write the region, telling that we are thinking that we belong to IP. I hope you're helping us, but it's like it's taking too long a time. But there are some reasons also that we have to understand why it's taking a long time. But we are very hopeful that with the intervention of NCIP, it won't be difficult for us also to preserve our culture or whatever IK activity that we are doing. So the activity then in our activity, we have included them as part of the, they will be among our speakers. They would be introducing to our faculty members when we do IK activities, what are the processes that we are going to go through. And we would also want to emphasize to the NCIP that we do this to facilitate and not to make things a bit difficult. So that's one thing with the NCIP that we are having now. We are connecting with them because we also believe in the university that through the NCIP, this is also one way for us to preserve our culture or safeguard our culture. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question here. It's from Ruth and it's addressed to the others. She says, our group visited Pamulaan 2 years ago and we learned that part of the mechanism is to bring students in the Pamulaan Center like boarding school. How do we make sense of this? Or was there a change in this strategy? Mr. Abadjano?
Again, what's it's not so clear to me.
She said that the strategy of Pamulaan has been to bring the scholars together in a boarding school. Has there been a change in strategy, and what can you say about this boarding together as a way of, I don't know, of integrating IT education?
Okay, that has not changed in fact, because the students who are accepted in Pamulaan are those who really don't have the capacity to support themselves in sending to the regular school. So because our focus now are those families, indigenous families living in extreme poverty. That's the main focus of Pamulaan now. Because since there's already free education, so which means more students can go to the mainstream school already. So what we would like to focus on are those who don't have the capacity and give them special training on education and on specific courses and use the indigenous knowledge also as the basic foundation in all the learning processes that they have to go through.
So I can imagine that this approach is a very different experience compared to other students who go home, you know, to their very different contexts away from the school. For the Pamulaan, it's to be together for the whole time, and as fellow indigenous people, although they're from different parts, maybe there is some other kind of commonality or solidarity that can be created out of that. I don't know.
Yeah, in fact, there was even a time when we thought of changing the strategy. We will just send students to the different schools, you know, different state colleges and universities, and even to private institutions, instead of having the dormitory. But based on the feedback coming from those who have gone through the training, they've realized that there is really a value of them being together, coming from the different indigenous groups, because they're learning a lot, and the formation aspect is lacking when they will be sent to the mainstream school, because they're together, they learn from one another, and when they go to the different committees for practicum, because our learning process is dynamic. Every semester, they are all required to go to the different communities and learn from the communities themselves on the different indigenous practices, and at the same time, how the knowledge that they have gotten from the university can be applied or applicable to the communities that to the IP communities. So there is a dynamic learning process which they feel that will not anymore happen if they will just study in the mainstream school. That's why they requested, the families and the communities requested, if we can continue having that kind of setup so that we can really produce graduates who are future leaders in the future, and who can also better understand the dynamics of the different IPs coming from the different tribes, not just from one indigenous or ethnographic group.
Thank you. Okay, I am told that we have to end at 12, and I should inform the speakers to please stay uh, after the participants have left, and also that we need to have a group photo. Is this group photo for all the participants or only the speakers? I don't know.
For everyone po.
For everyone, okay. So do we still have time for any comment from anybody else, or should we close because we still have to award some certificates? Last words, okay. Is there, maybe should I call on you, Fresh Obay, or anybody who would, or everybody who would like to give their last few words on integrating IP education in higher educational institutions? Last words, please.
So Maria,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, let me just, there are two more items kasi that you ask us to deal with, yung difficulties and challenges, but some of these have been dealt with in the process. But
Yes.
there's another, this is kind of yung to wrap it up, ways we would
Yes,
move it
please.
forward. So I listed a number of things that probably can inform future moves. So a review and assessment of existing programs and initiatives nationwide, is needed. Creation of a multi-sectoral consultative body spearheaded by visionary leaders from the ranks of IP communities, a strong lobby for government support to ensure fiscal stability, more research, more literature and capacity building activities, critical review of existing literature on IP in the Philippines, where IP intellectuals will play a pivotal role. Then I also thought maybe we should consolidate existing IP studies related databases. And lastly, forge inter-university collaborations. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. And I hope you will, we will ask you to keep the slides with us. We'll try to produce maybe a transcript and share it also after this, perhaps, with everybody who has spoken here. Okay, there's a comment, kudos to Pamulaan and Dr. Abadjano. And who else would like to give last words next? Mr. Abadjano, would you like to? Hello? Can I call on you next, or should it be Nancy, Miss Nancy, VP Nancy, or Ruth? Ruth, please.
Sige, yes. Oo nga.
Okay.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think yung mga takeaway messages nga naman natin dito is really for us to take time to review and indeed evaluate what have we been doing as far as IP education is concerned. And then, of course, try to put together our resources, including knowledge resources, so that we can have a better perspective of how to do IP education given yung changing context and challenges din natin. So yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Ruth. And who's next? VP Nancy? Okay, yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay,
I am just hopeful that.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah,
I think ladies first.
I'm just hopeful that all the other, yeah, sorry, sir. I'm just hopeful that all the other SUCs would also find importance in being serious in implementing this or doing some measures really on how to integrate IK in the curriculum. Because sometimes it's also up to the SUC to do it. And in our, when we received our comments from the Commissioner De Las Iliagas, commenting that, remarking that we are going to integrate IK in our curricula, we already gave our stand of saying that we have already integrated. So with that note from her, it really means that they are really pushing us to go through integrating IK in our curricula. And I just hope that the rest of the other SUCs, including private higher education institution, would also give importance to this. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Mr. Benji?
I also would like to acknowledge the efforts of the different institutions and the interest of this new mandate from CHED. In fact, even we ourselves are very, very happy as well that, we've been doing IP education for the past 30 years. And it is only now that finally the government has recognized the value of this. And I think what is needed also is patience from among ourselves, that since this is something new and we need to accompany one another, we need to support one another. We need to, the learning is not only from one organization or two organizations, but it's really coming from the different initiatives of the different institutions. And I think that's the beauty of this process. It may not, we may not see right away the fruits of these efforts, but I think the process of going through is very important, because in the process we will also see the strengths of the different institutions, the efforts, like for example the efforts in the Mountain Province and other universities. We could learn from one another. So we're very excited and we are happy to learn from one another in this conference. Thank you very much.
And with that, I would like to thank everybody, all the participants, and all the speakers. I think we will end the session here, and I turn the floor to the organizers from the LSU.
Again, we would like to thank our discussants for joining our RTD today. Indeed, we learned a lot. And with that, we wish to present our certificate of appreciation to all the participants, and let me read the citation. The Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao Incorporated, Ugat Anthropological Association of the Philippines, and De La Salle University Social Development Research Center award the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Euphrasia Abaya as discussant in the 42nd UGAD Annual Conference Roundtable discussion entitled Integration of IP Education in Higher Education Institutions, held on November 20 from 10 to 12 noon via Zoom, signed by Ms. Susana Roldan, UGAD President, and the Director of the LSUS DRC, yours truly. And the same certificates will also be given to Mr. Benjamin Abadiano, Dr. Ruth Batani, Dr. Nancy Ann Gonzalez, and another certificate to Dr. Maria Mangas for moderating our RTD this morning. So again, we wish to thank everyone for attending the roundtable discussions, and we hope that this is only just the beginning of this continuing journey towards the integration of IP education in HEIs. Again po, maraming salamat sa ating lahat. So maybe at this point, Jesse can now take our group picture.
Yes, we'd like to request everyone who's comfortable switching on their cam for our group photo. We're taking a snapshot in 3, 2, 1. One more for the other side. Salamat po sa lahat. Thank you again, and we'd like to invite you for